So how did you feel when we first reported last night, maybe you heard it today, that President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, in testimony that he's preparing for Congress next month, will call the President of the United States, quote, a madman? How do you think former CIA Director John Brennan felt when he heard that? I'll ask him that in just a moment. Today, the Senate Intelligence Committee is considering issuing a subpoena to Michael Cohen as part of the committee's ongoing Russia investigation. Senator Richard Burr, the chairman of the committee, confirmed to ABC News that a subpoena is possible. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Michael Cohen's public testimony next month before the House Oversight Committee, quote, is expected to be highly restricted to avoid interfering with the special counsel's Russia investigation, suggesting the hearing may be less revelatory on certain subjects than anticipated. According to a person close to Michael Cohen, he will not be able to talk about some of the topics that he has discussed with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. But a source tells NBC News that Michael Cohen is still expected to give an explosive recounting of his experience working for Donald Trump. This source, who is familiar with Michael Cohen's prepared remarks, says that Cohen plans to describe the President of the United States as a, quote, madman. The testimony will give you chills. Joining our discussion now is John Brennan, former CIA director. He is a national security and intelligence analyst for MSNBC and NBC News. As a former director of the CIA, knowing so much more than we can ever know about the actual weight of the responsibility of all of the national security apparatus that the president controls, what is it like to hear a comment like that from someone who knows Donald Trump better than anyone who's working for him now?
Well, first of all, I think it's corroboration of what a lot of people have believed for so long, a belief that has been borne out by a lot of Mr. Trump's actions and policies and statements over the last 2 years. But I think more than that, it's very worrisome that this is the person who American citizens entrust with their national security, with their future prosperity. And somebody who is just so self-promoting, self-advancing, and is interested in self-preservation at the expense of this country, I think it really does underscore what Michael Cohen has witnessed over the course of many years. So I think many of us are going to be interested in hearing his first-person representation of what it was like to see Donald Trump up close and personal. And again, it's very, very worrisome because he is in the Oval Office. He's the incumbent right now. And we all should be very worried about his lack of stability.
There's so much that's developed recently this week with the president and information about Russia, including this new information that he basically restricts anyone in the administration from really knowing what he has said in his conversations with Vladimir Putin. If you were sitting there as the CIA director and these things occurred, that where no one else was allowed in the room or the translator's notes were not available, the stories that we've been reading about how this has been handled, what would you do? What you would have an interest still in knowing what was said in that room, but you can't find out from the president. What would a CIA director do?
Well, you need to know what transpired in that 2-hour exchange because the Russians know. Yeah. And the Russians have internalized whatever message it was and the exchanges that Mr. Trump had with Mr. Putin. And so I would be very, very interested in pursuing avenues to try to have a better understanding of. First of all, I would go to the White House and, try to insist that we need to know what's going on.
Would you try to go face to face with the president and say, I need to know, after he got back from, say, Helsinki or something?
I've never encountered a situation like this before because the previous presidents that I worked for, both Democrat and Republican, would want to make sure that their senior staff and, directors of the intelligence community agencies would understand because that gives us a sense of what it is how the Russians might try to exploit whatever was discussed there. So it's still, it's inexplicable why Mr. Trump did not allow his national security advisor, Secretary of State in that meeting. Clearly, he was trying to keep something from them. What was he concealing? And what did Mr. Putin come away with from that conversation? So, the intelligence agencies do not collect against the President of the United States or U.S. officials. But we do have this need to understand how the Russians are going to take advantage of whatever Mr. Trump might have said.
And so this is the strange presidency where he actually does these things on TV. And during the campaign, he asked the Russians to steal Hillary Clinton's email and provide them, in effect, to the Trump campaign or to the American public. And because he did it on TV, the Republicans' defense is, oh, it was a joke. I want to look at another piece of video. There's no sound to this. This is Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. They're at the G20 dinner in Germany. And Trump is highlighted there in one part of the screen. Putin's down there, and there's this signal that he gives to Putin, and we're going to rerun it because we look at that, and I'm wondering if you had picked this up as some kind of intelligence that the American government picked up in a Russian restaurant of two people giving that kind of signal, and you know that these people are in positions of trust by their governments and in essentially an adversarial position. I mean, what do you think you're looking at when you see that?
It really is quite curious, and I think it just reflects that there's a special relationship between those two individuals. And if any previous president had done that, I wouldn't, quite frankly, think twice about it, because I'm sure we would have gotten the full readout.
Right.
The fact that Mr. Trump, with all the baggage that he has on his relationship with the Russians and with Mr. Putin, and Russian interference, and the way that he has had this fawning attitude toward Mr. Putin, and he has these very, one-on-one conversations with him that he keeps from others, it really just continues to fuel the suspicions and the concerns about what is going on. And that's why I think the intelligence community agencies have a right to try to understand better, again, how the Russians may be taking advantage of somebody like Mr. Trump, who I don't believe is an asset of Russia, by the formal term, but I do believe that he is being manipulated and exploited, and that Putin, who is a trained KGB intelligence officer, is a master puppeteer in many respects. And I just feel as though Mr. Trump has fallen prey to what Mr. Putin is trying to do, undermining the national security of this country. And when I hear Mr. Trump say that he's thinking about getting out of NATO, an alliance, an organization, will celebrate the 70th anniversary of NATO this April 4th. It's the foundation stone of our national security, and with our partners and allies in Europe. And to think that we were going to remove ourselves from that alliance, that partnership that is so important as far as giving the United States access to land bases in Europe, giving us overflight rights in Europe, preventing the expansion first of the Soviet Union and Russia. These are I can't even begin to understand what is the basis of the logic behind it, other than he believes that he is doing this and he's going to gain some favor from Mr. Putin and others. It is just totally head-scratching.
And on NATO, what seems to be lost in it all, that it seems to be the one lesson you might be able to teach Donald Trump is remember World War I. Remember World War II. They were 20 years apart. 20 years later, those same countries, those same European countries, were all very strong allies, thanks to, among other things, an organization called NATO.
And American leadership.
Yeah.
And we were not recoiling from our leadership responsibilities around the world. And Mr. Trump is doing it on every time, whether it be on Syria or whether it be on issues like our NATO alliance.
John Brennan, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lance.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.